Jesus wept. As you heard read in my bio, thank you, Dr. Boyce, I am from Greensboro. We moved there when I was 4. For the first years of my life, my family and I lived in Richmond, Virginia. Some people say children don't really have memories from the early years of their life. We just have memorized the stories our families have told us about that time. However, sometimes I see flashes of images in my mind that don't look like any of the pictures my family keeps in our photo albums. I see a row of white buildings with black lettering. One of these buildings has a rainbow on the sign. I know from the family stories that this place is called Rainbow Station, the daycare where my mom worked and where I went to school each day. My dad likes to tell a story from when I was 3 years old. He was driving me to daycare, and I told him, I don't want to go to Rainbow Station all the time. But since I was 3, the word station came out with a T. What I actually said was, I don't want to go to Rainbow Station all the time. 27 years later, I still go to school. And a lot has changed, although at the same time, not much has changed. I don't want to go to divinity school all the time. My parents met in seminary. When I decided to come to Wake Div, my mom warned me of the trials I might endure that she faced in school. She was right about everything. Don't you hate when that happens? Divinity school is not very physically demanding unless you count climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor. But it is like a boot camp for your mind, heart, and spirit. Some days are good, some days are great, and some days are not. Those are the days we may not feel like coming to school all of the time. A couple of weeks ago for me, every day was one of those days that I didn't feel like coming to the school all the time or at all. I hit a wall. I was burnt out from 3 years of classes, especially after spending last semester scrambling to turn in PhD applications, which is like a part-time job, on top of the 3 part-time jobs I did actually have, a full course load, and personal trials, including deaths in the family. I was mentally and physically exhausted and didn't have much left to give. My dog Bacon was also going through some things, by which I mean he was wanting to go outside every 20 minutes to see what our neighbor's dog was doing who was in heat. Most of you know that Bacon is a beagle, and beagles are very vocal dogs. Bacon made it clear to me very often and loudly that he wanted to get to know the girl next door. As someone who also lives with OCD and depression, the stress and exhaustion were taking a toll on my mental health. I cried all the time, almost every day for 2 weeks. I cried by myself, I cried to my boyfriend Martin, my mom, my dad, to God, and to my therapist. My therapist told me things were compounded. It felt good to hear that the weight I felt was valid. During this time, I listened to a lot of Beyonce to try to lift my spirits. I especially love her most recent album, Renaissance. One day as I listened to her sing, You Won't Break My Soul, I heard and felt my spirit sing along. My spirit sang to my brain and my OCD and depression, You won't break my soul. My spirit sang to my cynicism about school and my mental fatigue, You won't break my soul. My spirit sang to the part of me inside that felt like I wasn't good enough to take care of Bacon, You won't break my soul. I sang this song to myself, the parts of me that were at war with each other. A little after this moment, things started looking up. My neighbor's dog ended her cycle, and my little boy went back to his normal behaviors and routines. I found the energy to email and talk to my professors, and together we laid out a strategy to help me end the semester successfully. I decided to experiment with cutting back on drinking, practice meditation more often, continue to go on a walk every day with Bacon, and all the while continue to pray to God about everything. Today I feel much better, even though I can still sense the heaviness of my eyelids, weighed down from tears from less than a month ago. When Gabby and Marian reached out to me about planning today's service, I knew I wanted to talk about crying and how tears can feel bitter and tender all at once as they fall down your face. How crying can be a prayer unto itself that God hears and interprets when there are no words left. How it's all right to cry. Crying gets the sad out of you. It can also help you process joy. How even Jesus himself cried. Jesus wept. The Gospel of John tells us an account of a man named Lazarus falling ill. We see in the text, in the midst of his friend's illness, Jesus also strived to continue his ministry. In verse 7 of chapter 11, he tells his disciples that it is time to go to Judea again. The disciples point out to him that the Jews had tried to stone him and question why he wants to go there again. Jesus decided that instead he would go to visit his friend Lazarus again and awaken him. The disciples did not know that Jesus knew Lazarus had died, and they thought he meant he merely intended to awaken him from his sleep. As this account progresses, Jesus and the disciples arrive to see that Lazarus has already been placed in a tomb. Martha and Mary, the sisters of Lazarus, spoke with Jesus about these things. The Bible says in verse 33 that when Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who came with her were also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. It says that Jesus said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he left him." We know this story. We know that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. But in verse 35 of this chapter, in the shortest verse in the canonical text, we get a glimpse into Jesus' inner world. Jesus had a lot on his plate. He probably sensed that his own death would be soon. He dealt with people who doubted him and wanted to stone him. He dealt with people who had high expectations of him. He was sad his friend had died, and he probably also felt empathy for Mary and Martha. Jesus didn't bury his feelings or hide them away or try to cover them up, or even try to explain them away with a parable. At that moment, there were no words left to say. All that he could do was allow himself to feel his feelings, to let himself go, to allow his body to do what human bodies naturally do, which is to make tears. In Jesus' tears, when Jesus wept, we once again are blessed to witness his deep humanity. Crying is not shameful. Crying doesn't have to be something we try to force ourselves not to do. Jesus, the Messiah, cried. He took the time to process his emotions, and then he got up and went about his usual business of performing miracles. What I'm trying to say is, crying, grieving, and processing emotions is not antithetical to being a good student, a good pastor, a good chaplain, a good teacher, or a good staff member. Sometimes crying is a gift that lets our bodies process and release everything that is swirling in our minds, bodies, and spirits so that we can go back out and continue the work that we have been called to do. Maybe for you, it isn't always crying. Maybe you struggle with opening up and talking to someone when you are having a hard time. Maybe you are the person who has been taught that to feel emotion and to express it is a weakness. Maybe you have been taught to act like you have it all together, or maybe you want people to think you have it all together. Today is an invitation to reacquaint yourself with yourself. To someday soon intentionally carve out a time and space outside of your busy life to feel the feelings that have been kept inside in a way that feels safe and authentic to you. Maybe for you, that is crying. Maybe it's sweating from a hard workout or talking to a friend. What I'm trying to say is that we should not become so busy and strong and successful or try to impress others or ourselves or try to have it all together in such a way that we forget to be human. What does it feel like when you tap into your divinity by being the rawest form of human that you can muster? How can we learn from Jesus and how he took the time to cry? How are Jesus and his tears an example of taking the time to just stop and feel? I don't know about you, but I like Jesus. I think he was a sincere person, and I think he strived to be the best person he could be most of the time. As we get older and become more sophisticated in our exegesis, we wink at each other when we say things like, Jesus was kind of a jerk in this story, or Jesus could have handled that differently. We know that most lay people have been taught to see Jesus as infallible and perfect, and so we feel wise and maybe even a little smug to dare to criticize Jesus and his humanity. But isn't that the point? Jesus was human and also divine. In his humanity, Jesus felt the heat from the sun, the dirt in his sandals, the pudgy fingers as he held the hand of a little child, and the grief of losing a friend, just like all of us. We can turn to Jesus and his example to remind us not to forget that sometimes we need to feel. Jesus wept, and then he got up and rose Lazarus from the dead. In a similar fashion, although maybe not to the same miraculous degree, we may continue to face the trials and tribulations of divinity school and life, no matter how big or small, without forgetting to allow ourselves to feel what comes naturally along the way. When I was a little kid, my mom would play an album of children's music on the CD player called Free to Be You and Me by Marlo Thomas and Friends. The album was originally released in 1972, so for those who aren't familiar, it has like a Partridge Family kind of vibe. I believe this album has the power to help us make people better. And this is an album I probably mentioned, I know, to Dr. Senior and plenty of other classes where I'm like, this album needs to be in our curriculum. Just that whole album, every song is just a blessing. It teaches lessons about acceptance, self-love, friendship, and community. This may sound funny, but sometimes when I was little, I would take the CD to the boombox in my bedroom and go directly to the track, It's All Right to Cry. I would listen to the song, and I would just cry, and then I felt better. The singer of this song, Rosie Greer, sings, "Raindrops from your eyes, washing all the mad out of you. Raindrops from your eyes, it's gonna make you feel better. It's all right to feel things, though the feelings may be strange. Feelings are such real things, and they change and change and change." And then, 50 years later, Beyonce tells us, "If you don't seek it, you won't see it. That we all know. If you don't think it, you won't be it. That love ain't yours. Trying to fake it never makes it. That we all know. You can have the stress and not take less. I'll justify love. I'm taking my new salvation. I'm gonna build my own foundation. Got motivation. I just found me a new foundation." To the toxic masculinity, to the hustle and grind culture narratives, to the perfectionism, to the denial of the self, to the self-doubt, to the depression, to the haters, to the parts of ourselves that don't want to show our vulnerability or our weaknesses to others, we can say, "You won't break my soul." And to you I say, it's all right to cry, because even Jesus wept. Amen. Amen.